Nestled in the hills of Mulholland Drive, Jack Nicholson's house has long been the subject of eerie speculation. Though the actor himself has never publicly acknowledged anything unusual, many guests and visitors have reported chilling experiences that defy explanation. The most infamous story revolves around a particular room, one that many claim is unnaturally cold, no matter the season. Friends and acquaintances of Nicholson who have stayed overnight describe an unsettling atmosphere, as if someone unseen were watching them. More than once, guests have fled in the middle of the night, shaken and unable to explain what had terrified them. One well-known case involved a friend of Nicholson's who was staying in the house while recovering from an illness. In the dead of night, he awoke to hushed whispers echoing around the room. At first, he assumed it was Nicholson playing a prank. But as he reached for his phone to turn on the flashlight, the whispers abruptly stopped, only for the air around him to grow icy cold. When he finally dared to look, he saw faint flashes of light flickering in the darkness, as if something or someone was moving just beyond his vision. Another visitor, a producer who had worked with Nicholson in the past, recalled stepping into the mysterious room only to feel an overwhelming sense of dread, as though he had walked into a place he wasn't supposed to be. The sensation was so strong that he turned and left immediately, later confessing that he had never before felt such a primal fear. Rumors suggest that the house was built on land with a tragic past, though the details remain murky. Some say a previous owner, a reclusive artist, vanished under mysterious circumstances, leaving behind unfinished paintings that hinted at disturbing visions. Others claim the land itself was once the site of an unmarked burial ground, though there is little historical evidence to confirm it. Jack Nicholson, known for his intense and often otherworldly performances, has never spoken publicly about the alleged hauntings. Some say he laughs off the rumors, while others insist that he avoids that particular room himself. Whether the stories are the product of overactive imaginations or something far more sinister, one thing remains certain: those who have spent a night in that house never forget what they've experienced. When Jack Nicholson finally decided to part ways with his Mulholland Drive home, the sale was quiet, almost secretive. The new owners, David and Lisa Holloway, a successful couple from New York looking for a fresh start in Los Angeles, were thrilled to move into a house with such Hollywood history. They dismissed the whispered rumors about strange occurrences, attributing them to overactive imaginations and urban legends. For the first few weeks, everything seemed normal. The couple marveled at the breathtaking views, the sprawling property, and the sense of privacy the house afforded. But then, little things started happening. At first, it was just a strange draft. No matter how many times they checked the windows and vents, one particular room, the same room Nicholson's guests had feared, remained inexplicably cold. Lisa, a practical woman, insisted it was just poor insulation. "It's an old house," she said. "It has its quirks." Then came the whispers. David was the first to hear them. Late one night, while working in his study, he caught the faint sound of hushed voices coming from down the hall. Thinking Lisa was on the phone, he went to check, only to find her fast asleep. The moment he stepped into the hallway, the voices ceased. The couple's dog, Milo, refused to enter the cold room. He would stand at the threshold, growling softly, the fur on his back bristling. Whenever Lisa tried to coax him inside, he would whimper and back away. Maybe something happened in here, Lisa mused one afternoon. Maybe someone died. One night, their fears became undeniable. Lisa awoke to the feeling of someone standing over her. Groggy and disoriented, she turned over, expecting to see David, only to find him still sound asleep beside her. The room was dark, but just as she was about to dismiss it as a nightmare, a flicker of light danced across the ceiling. It wasn't coming from outside. It was inside the room. A cold shiver ran down her spine as she reached out to shake David awake. "Do you see that?" she whispered. David, now alert, sat up and followed her gaze. The dim, pulsing glow moved across the room, like the light from an old film projector. Then came the whispering, low, urgent murmurs, as if multiple voices were speaking at once, but the words were impossible to decipher. David grabbed his phone and turned on the flashlight. The moment the beam of light cut through the darkness, everything stopped. The glow disappeared, The whispers fell silent, and the air, once icy, became still. Neither of them slept for the rest of the night. The next morning, Lisa started researching the history of the house. What she found unsettled her. Before Nicholson had purchased it, the home had belonged to a little-known artist named Victor Sloan, a man who had disappeared in the late 1960s under mysterious circumstances. Some said he had gone mad, claiming to see things lurking in the shadows of his own home. His last known work, an unfinished painting found in the house's basement, depicted a distorted figure standing in the very room that now filled them with dread. Days later, they discovered the painting still hidden behind an old cabinet in the basement. Its colors were faded, the canvas torn in places, but the image was clear, a spectral figure standing in the shadows, its hollow eyes staring directly forward. Lisa and David didn't stay much longer after that. Within a month, the house was back on the market. To this day, it remains empty. Don't forget to subscribe and like if you liked this story. After Lisa and David Holloway abruptly left, the house sat vacant for months. Real estate agents struggled to find a buyer. Each interested party withdrew after a single visit, citing an inexplicable unease. Some felt a chill even in the warm Los Angeles air, while others claimed the house seemed to hum, as if something within its walls was alive. Then came Mark and Olivia Carter, a young, ambitious couple from San Francisco. They had no patience for ghost stories. Olivia, a documentary filmmaker, saw the rumors as an opportunity. A haunted Hollywood house? People would kill for a story like this. She was determined to make a film about the myths surrounding the property, convinced she could separate fact from fiction. Mark, a tech entrepreneur, was skeptical but amused. If there's a ghost, let's at least charge it rent. The first few nights were uneventful. But then, Olivia set up her cameras. She placed motion-activated recorders throughout the house, focusing on the infamous cold room. By morning, the footage seemed normal except for one anomaly. At exactly 3:12 a.m., the camera in the hallway flickered, just for a moment. Then, nothing. But each night, the flickering grew longer. By the end of the week, it lasted nearly a full minute. And then, something else happened. Mark woke to the sound of footsteps outside their bedroom. Slow, deliberate. He held his breath, straining to listen. Olivia was still asleep beside him. The steps stopped just outside the door. Heart pounding, he reached for his phone, switched on the flashlight, and swung the door open. The hallway was empty, except for one thing. The guest room door, the cold room, was wide open. Mark was sure they had shut it before bed. The next morning, Olivia checked the cameras. The footage sent a shiver down her spine. At 3:12 a.m., just as the hallway camera flickered, the guest room door creaked open on its own. That was the first night they truly felt afraid. Then Olivia found something else. Digging deeper into the history of the house, she discovered an old interview with a woman named Eleanor Grayson, Victor Sloan's last known visitor before he vanished. In a grainy black and white clip from a 1971 documentary, Eleanor looked pale and gaunt, her fingers clutching a string of pearls at her throat. "He told me the house was changing," she said, "that something had been unlocked. He wouldn't go near that room anymore. He said at night, he could hear it breathing." She hesitated, glancing off camera. Then, barely above a whisper, she added, "But it's not the house. It's what's inside it." Olivia slammed her laptop shut. The words felt too close, too real. That night, she set up the cameras again. At 3:12 a.m., she and Mark were both wide awake when the whispering started. This time, they weren't just hearing it. It was calling their names. Olivia and Mark lay frozen in bed, their names drifting through the darkness in hushed, urgent whispers. The sound didn't come from any one place, it surrounded them, as if the walls themselves were speaking. Mark's hand tightened around Olivia's wrist. He could feel her trembling. Then, as suddenly as it had started, the whispering stopped. The silence that followed was worse. Mark reached for his phone, his fingers fumbling as he turned on the flashlight. He swept the beam across the room, but nothing was there. No movement, no shadows, just the uneasy stillness of a house that felt too aware of them. But then, a creak. Not from their room but down the hall. The guest room door had opened again. Olivia bolted upright, grabbed her camera, and switched it to night vision. Through the screen, the dim hallway came into view, bathed in an eerie green glow. The guest room door stood ajar, but something was off. The doorway was darker than it should have been, like something was standing there, watching. A sharp, metallic click echoed through the house. The camera had shut off. A cold dread settled in Olivia's stomach as she frantically pressed the power button. Nothing. The battery, which had been nearly full, was completely drained. Mark grabbed her arm. "We're leaving. Now." They stumbled out of bed, shoving their feet into shoes, grabbing their keys. Mark didn't care that they were in their pajamas. They had to get out. But as they reached the bedroom door, something changed. The air grew thick, heavy, pressing down on their chests like an unseen weight. Olivia gasped, clutching at her throat, her breath coming in short, panicked bursts. Mark staggered back, gripping the doorknob for support. The whispers returned. This time they weren't calling their names. They were laughing. The sound slithered through the room, dry and rasping, growing louder, more distorted. It was no longer just whispers, it was voices layered on top of each other, speaking in a language neither of them understood. And then, the bedroom door slammed shut on its own. Something wanted them to stay. Olivia reached for her phone, desperate to record what was happening. As soon as she turned on the camera, the screen flickered just like the hallway footage. For a fraction of a second, something appeared. A face. Not human. Not entirely. Just wide, sunken eyes staring directly into the lens. Then, the power cut out. Everything went black. The power failure plunged the house into suffocating darkness. Olivia's phone screen, which had been their only source of light, flickered once more just long enough to show the hollow eyes still staring back at her. Then the screen went dead. The air turned thick, pressing against their skin like an invisible weight. Olivia struggled to breathe, her pulse hammering in her throat. Mark gripped her arm, his fingers ice-cold. "Move," he whispered, barely able to get the word out. They fumbled their way to the door, Mark twisting the handle with frantic urgency. It wouldn't budge. The lock hadn't engaged, yet some unseen force was holding it shut. Behind them, the laughter stopped. The silence stretched. Then, from the other side of the door, a single knock. Not loud, not aggressive, just deliberate. "Knock, knock, knock." Mark yanked at the door harder, his breath coming in ragged gasps. Olivia backed away, her eyes fixed on the door, waiting, dreading what would come next. The knocking stopped, and then something scraped against the wood. A slow, deliberate sound, like fingernails dragging down the surface. It started at the top of the door and slid downward, impossibly long. Olivia clapped a hand over her mouth to keep from screaming. Then came the whisper. Just one word. "Stay." The door burst open on its own. Cold air rushed past them, like something had just stepped aside. Without thinking, they ran through the darkened hallway, down the stairs, toward the front door. Olivia reached it first, her hands shaking as she fumbled with the lock. But before she could twist the knob, a sound stopped her. From upstairs, a dragging noise, slow, heavy, like something was moving across the floor of the cold room. No, like something was crawling, and it was coming toward the stairs. Mark grabbed Olivia's wrist. "Don't look," but she did. For just a second, she glanced up, and saw it. Something shifting in the darkness, just beyond the railing at the top of the staircase. A figure low to the ground, its limbs bending the wrong way, its sunken eyes locked onto hers. The whispering started again. But this time it wasn't laughing. It was calling her name. Olivia turned the knob with all her strength. The door flew open, and they stumbled outside, the cool night air hitting their skin like a slap. They ran to their car, barely pausing to breathe as Mark fumbled with the keys. As the engine roared to life, Olivia risked one last glance at the house. The upstairs window, the one in the cold room, was open, and from the darkness inside, two sunken eyes stared back at her. The whispers didn't stop until they reached the city. Even miles away from the house, Olivia and Mark felt it something unseen, clinging to them like a shadow. The whispering had stopped the moment they left Mulholland Drive, but an eerie weight still pressed against their chests, as if the house wasn't done with them. They drove in silence, the city lights blurring past. Olivia clutched the camera in her lap, her fingers numb. The footage. She had to check the footage. When they finally reached their downtown apartment, neither of them spoke. Mark locked the door behind them, checking it twice. He didn't ask why. He just did it. Olivia powered on her laptop, her hands shaking. She pulled the memory card from her camera and inserted it. A folder popped up. 3:12 a.m. recordings. She hesitated, then clicked. The first video was static. The second also static. She skipped ahead, her pulse pounding. Then, finally, an image. The hallway, the cold room's door, and something standing in the doorway. Not a figure. Not quite. More like a smudge of black, shifting shape, as if the camera lens couldn't fully capture it. She turned up the volume. At first, there was nothing but a faint hum. Then, a whisper. Low, indistinct. Then sharper. She leaned in. It was her name. Olivia. She jerked away from the screen, her heart hammering. Mark. Her voice came out strained. It knows my name. Mark came over, his face pale. Delete it. I can't. She didn't even know why she said it. Just that she couldn't. Instead, she scrubbed through the footage again, frame by frame. And then, at the very end, just before the video cut out, something changed. For a fraction of a second, the dark smudge in the doorway twisted, stretched. Then the image sharpened. A face. Not the hollow-eyed thing she had seen before. This face was different. It was hers. Distorted. Warped. But unmistakable. And just before the screen went black, her own voice whispered back. Stay. A cold dread settled in her stomach. She turned to Mark, her mouth dry. But Mark was already staring at her. His expression frozen. His face pale. And then he whispered. Olivia, your phone. She looked down. The screen was on. The call log open. Her phone had dialed a number. She didn't recognize it. But the timestamp said the call had been going 3 minutes and 12 seconds. And from the speaker came the sound of whispering. Olivia's breath caught in her throat. The whispering on the phone was faint, layered, as if multiple voices were speaking at once, too distorted to understand, but undeniably there. Mark grabbed the phone from her hand, staring at the number on the screen. Who is this? He demanded, his voice unsteady. The whispering stopped. For a moment, there was nothing but silence. Then, a voice. Not a whisper this time. Clear. Familiar. Olivia's own voice. Stay. Mark dropped the phone as if it had burned him. The screen flickered. The call ended. The apartment was silent except for their ragged breathing. Olivia forced herself to pick up the phone, her fingers ice cold. She checked the call history. The number was gone. No record of the call. No evidence that it had ever happened. Mark ran a hand through his hair, pacing. Okay. Maybe your phone glitched. Maybe it picked up some weird interference. Olivia didn't respond. She couldn't, because as she stared at the dark screen of her phone, something inside her whispered the truth. The house wasn't done with them. And worse, it had followed them. That night, neither of them slept. Mark insisted they keep the lights on, but the apartment still felt dim. The corners of the room seemed deeper, the shadows stretching longer than they should. At 3:12 a.m., Olivia's eyes snapped open. The air was heavy, thick. She turned her head slowly toward the bedroom door. It was open. She was sure they had closed it. Her breath caught as a shape moved in the dark hallway. Not walking, crawling. The same twisted, unnatural movement she had glimpsed on the stairs at Mulholland Drive. Olivia reached for Mark, shaking him awake. It's here, she whispered. Mark's eyes flew open just as the whispering started again, low, insidious, coming from inside their room. From the closet. The door creaked. Olivia grabbed Mark's hand. They were seconds away from bolting when the whispering stopped. Not faded. Not trailed off. just stopped, as if whatever was speaking had suddenly noticed them listening. The silence stretched, and then, a slow, deliberate knock. From inside the closet. Knock, knock, knock. Mark's grip tightened around Olivia's. His lips barely moved as he whispered, "We have to run." But before they could move, the closet door handle started to turn. The closet handle twisted with an agonizing slowness. Olivia's body went rigid, her breath caught in her throat. Mark gripped her hand so tightly it hurt. Then, click, the door swung open. The darkness inside was impossibly deep, a void that seemed to swallow the light. The whispering started again, not from within the closet, but from all around them. Mark acted first. He grabbed Olivia's arm and yanked her toward the door. They didn't look back. They ran out of the bedroom, down the hall, toward the front door. But the apartment had changed. The walls felt tighter, the space unfamiliar. The door that led to their front hallway was gone. In its place, a staircase they had never seen before, and at the top of it, a door they knew, the cold room. No, Olivia's voice barely escaped her lips. They were back. Not in their apartment. Not in the city. They were inside the house. Inside Mulholland Drive. Mark grabbed her shoulders, his eyes wild. "Wake up. This isn't real. Can't be real." But Olivia knew it was. And the house knew they knew. The whispering grew louder. The temperature dropped. The walls pulsed like something alive. Then the door at the top of the stairs began to open. And it stepped out. A figure. No, her own reflection, warped and wrong. Sunken eyes. A stretched, twisted smile. It tilted its head at her, the way something inhuman mimics a person without truly understanding them. It raised a hand and beckoned. "No," Olivia choked out. "No, no, no." Mark grabbed her, pulling her backward, away from the thing wearing her face. "We have to wake up. We have to." But Olivia wasn't sure they could. Because as she looked into the cold, hollow eyes of her own reflection, she felt something stir deep inside her. A memory, or maybe something else. A whisper. Something had always been inside the house. And now, it was inside her. The last thing she heard before the darkness swallowed them whole was her own voice, laughing. Don't forget to subscribe and like if you liked this story.